Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Toronto Apologetics. My name is Tony Costa, and we're glad to have you along. And as you know, Toronto Apologetics is a Christian YouTube channel where we address various issues that challenge the historic Christian faith and providing answers to those questions. And we also deal with a wide range of subjects. So it's not just necessarily theology, it's not necessarily philosophy. We also deal with other pressing issues, even political ones, which is the theme of our discussion today. And so if you are a Canadian, and particularly an Ontarian, a member of the province of Ontario, if you live in the province of Ontario, then this is a very important live stream. We're going to be talking about the forthcoming election. There is a provincial election coming in June of this year. And so there's a lot of questions about who do we vote for? What is the alternative? If you're a conservative Christian, you may think you're only stuck with the Conservative Party, and you don't want to vote for the Liberals or the NDP in Ontario. And so what we want to discuss here today is talk about some other options. There are other parties, particularly the Ontario Party, that we're going to be talking about today. And we have the director and leader of the Ontario Party with us today. So without any further ado, I want to bring on my guests on. We have Michael Thiessen, and we also have Derek Sloan. So gentlemen, thank you and welcome to the program. It's an honor to have you both.
Thanks, Tony.
And great to be with you, Tony.
Yeah, Michael, maybe you can tell us a little bit first. We'll start with you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your association with the Liberty Coalition Canada.
Yeah, so Tony, as you know, there's been a significant attack on liberty in our nation for the last number of years, particularly since 2020. And so a number of Christian leaders, a number of pastors were feeling the heat and were feeling the pressure to go against their scriptural convictions, to close their churches, and at the same time to go against their consciences regarding a number of different issues like masking and social distancing and the vaccination and all those things. So I, together with a number of pastors, got together. We tried to think tank of a way forward, and we established the Liberty Coalition Canada, and I was tasked with the responsibility to go and then build that organization. So I went, and we have a running board. We're a registered non-for-profit, and basically we do three things at Liberty Coalition Canada. We do analysis in the news headlines, just kind of like what you're doing. We also at the same time take on legal cases in order to support Christians or individuals who are being coerced by the regulatory bodies against their conscience. And then we are involved behind the scenes with advocacy. So just taking on initiatives that would try to influence our Canadian culture towards taking Christian claims and Christ's claims and the authority of the word and applying it into the real world. So, for example, we have a number of initiatives like the Biblical Sexuality Sermon Sunday that we've done. We wrote an article on freedom against medical coercion. And then, of course, we were involved early on in establishing a group called the End the Lockdowns Caucus. And that caucus has now since wound down. And with the federal election behind us, I started asking everybody the questions, just what are we going to do provincially? And so that just led to informal conversations and encouragements to Derek to say, hey, look, like as someone who has stood up for the last 2 years, who has partnered with, freedom fighters, libertarians, social conservatives, basically anyone from any party who is concerned about the freedoms in this country, it was important for us to think about something for this election. And so I started having conversations with this gentleman, Derek Sloan, and other individuals with him. And of course, the party that he is now the leader of, the Ontario Party, just to encourage them would you keep doing what you have been doing, aimed towards affecting the policies and the issues that we talk about until the next election?
Right. Well, thank you for that. And folks, if you're interested in the Liberty Coalition Canada, the information is in the description box. You can find the links there to the Liberty Coalition Canada. And so, Derek, if you can maybe tell us a little bit about. I know you're a former MP, and I know that you took a stand when the lockdowns began. I know you got into a lot of hot water when you invited Dr. Bridle to come and speak in Parliament in Ottawa. Can you maybe give us a little bit of a background as to how you went from MP and then how you had to face the heat, and eventually you're now the director of the Ontario Party?
Yeah, that's a good summary of it, Tony. That's right. I was a federal member of Parliament. I at one time was a federal Conservative. I even ran for leadership of the federal Conservative Party, but I was ejected from that party for being too vocal on, yes, lockdown issues, but also issues relating to parental rights, transgender surgery for minors, and the so-called conversion therapy ban, which is more about a parental and pastoral instructional ban. But no, I was very vocal on these things, and it didn't sit well with the federal Conservative Party, and it would have sat even less well with Doug Ford's Conservative Party here in Ontario. The federal Conservatives are much more conservative, as it were, than the provincial Conservatives. So it is true that I'm leading a new provincial party called the Ontario Party, but we frankly need new options in Ontario, and the mainstream parties they just don't cut it for anybody who whether Christian or not, that wants accountability, that wants true leadership. They just don't cut it.
Right. And so, gentlemen, as you know, we've gone through 2 years of a pandemic, and we were told initially by Doug Ford that it was going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it became 2 years, and now he's been lifting many of these measures, and I think a lot of it has to do with the forthcoming election in June, and I think a lot of it is theater. But what would you guys say? Where really do we go from here? Because a lot of Ontarians, particularly conservative Christians and non-Christians who are conservative, they're wondering what are their options out there. And so, can maybe you gentlemen can talk about what Christians should be thinking about in the June election when it comes to, again, their conscience, standing up for or voting in members that are standing up for biblical principles and so forth. So, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, well, if we take a look at some of those values that you've just spoken about, I would challenge anyone who thinks that they still want to vote for Doug Ford to tell me when he has stood up for those principles. He reneged on his promise to change the sex ed curriculum. It basically wasn't changed at all, or very little, not from a substantive level. They haven't done anything with respect to lessening the burdens of we've had some of the most draconian COVID restrictions in the world in this province. And they've just recently passed a bill unanimously that would put, critical race theory indoctrination into the school system. So, and those are just 3 examples, but they've basically, haven't been standing up for Christians at all. I mean, this was the government that was fining and using the force of the state to attack pastors who were trying to run their churches during COVID-19. So this is not a friend of Christians. I don't think. I mean, it's a struggle for me to think of how, for example, the Liberal Party would have been worse. Would they have found a way to spend a bit more money? Yeah, probably. But I mean, what more could they have done in COVID?
Right.
I really do. I mean, I honestly think if the Liberals were in power right now, they would be trying to take some restrictions off too, just because, we have an election coming up and that type of thing. So maybe there would have been some differences on the margins, but the fact is that this party has not stood up for Christians. I was just speaking with a great Christian leader, a prominent one. I don't want to get him in trouble. But he was telling me that his own organization, and he counts himself, or used to count himself, as a friend of the premier. And this person's organization has been investigated multiple times by every step of the way. This person's Christian organization has run into governmental interference. And the Ford government has not been a friend to conservatives. It's not been a friend to Christians. And there's no way that people of good conscience can support that party going forward. There's no way.
Right. And so with the Ontario Party, Derek, can you maybe talk towards some of the values that the Ontario Party would advocate, and what are some of its principles that it would promote if elected in Ontario?
Yeah, so we have a fulsome platform that people can view on our website, which is ontarioparty.ca. We take a look at all the major issues. We have a great education policy, both for K-12 and post-secondary. And, in the K-12, we're focusing on not indoctrinating our kids. So whether that's with political bias or some of these radical new theories, like, like gender ideology, where they say that, male and female don't exist, or whether it's critical race theory, where they say that, if you have a certain skin color, then you're automatically this, or you're automatically biased, or you're at fault for things that someone who share your race or sex did 200 years ago. Or, Ontario is endemically racist. It's intrinsically racist. It's irredeemably racist. Or Canada. These are the kinds of things that are starting to get taught in our school system. And at the same time, our kids, math skills and reading skills and so on are declining. So we need to get the politics, get the indoctrination out of the school system, and actually teach our kids real things. We also have a great plan for our kids to move towards a funding the student model, which is an idea that the money that's allocated on a per student basis, the parents actually have a say of where that goes. So if they want to send their child to, let's say, a Christian school or a private school or a charter school, that they can allocate some of that money that they're already paying for in taxes to put their child in the place that they think is best. And that's going to open up competition in the public school board, which again is seemingly more concerned about keeping their teachers employed and doing the latest politically correct things, as opposed to teaching substantive skills. So that's one example on the K-12. We have robust policies with promoting freedom of speech, freedom of conscience. We don't agree with the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates. We think that medical decisions should be personal, and we have a great platform to address the overreach that's happened on those fronts, and to get Ontario working again.
Right. Well, it sounds like a great plan to me. Michael, did you want to add anything to what Derek has said already?
Yeah, I want to go back to the question, what next? And Tony, I think that one of the major battles right now is that conservatives and conservative Christians have really fallen for the lie the lie that is constantly given at every election, and that is, we, the big tent parties, are your only option.
Right.
Because everything else is vote splitting. So you're throwing away your vote if you don't vote for us.
Right.
And that comes from a philosophy of pragmatism, where we have been sold by, business corporations, and we've been, and of course, all of this leader ideology and pragmatism has seeped right into the church, right?
Yes.
Any type of philosophy of ministry is accepted if someone thinks it sells well. So let's sell Jesus to people because it doesn't have enough credentials to stand on his own as the king of the universe.
Right.
And that pragmatism seeps its way into every sphere of our behavior. And so you will hear parents say things like, well, I'm letting my teenager do that because if I push them too hard, then it'll push them away. Right. I remember I remember a teenager saying that to me once, saying, Pastor Mike, I don't like what you're saying. It's making me not want to be a Christian. And I responded and said, you don't like what I'm saying because you want to go out and do what you want to do, and
Yeah.
your sinful nature makes you not want to be a Christian. So, don't blame me. The point that I'm getting at is that this election and the next number of years, Christians and conservatives have to vote on principle
Right.
and stop. Like, I think Derek was rather generous to we do not have 5 or 6 conservative, like we have liberal behaved. Like, everybody is a bunch of socialists in Canada. My wife and I just got from the United States on a trip, and there is a decisive difference. Canadians have been socialized so much. And that's a battle of ideology, and battles of ideology are never won by conceding to your enemy on pragmatism. We have to go to the polls this time, and we have to communicate to our province that principled people are going to vote for principled issues. If we don't do it, what would motivate politicians like Derek Sloan to do anything on principle? And that's the issue. That's what we've seen. Nobody's being motivated by principle because they're not seeing their base saying, nope, dude, you're done. You're finished,
Right.
So I think we need to overcome pragmatism, and we need to vote on principle. That would be my biggest point going forward. How do we move forward?
Yeah, totally agree with you. It should definitely be on principle and not on pragmatism. I mean, we've seen what pragmatism has done in certain parts of the world. Did you want to add anything to that as well, Derek? I think Mike's made some very good points there.
Yeah, no, he really did. And I think it is, people have to understand that on the inside of these parties, and, I've been a part of the Conservative Party of Canada, there is an active drive by the leadership of these parties to expel social conservative elements from their parties. They want nothing to do with it. Yeah, sure, they want you to vote for them. They want you to, donate to them, but they will not lift a finger to do anything that is up your alley with respect to family values or anything like that. They want nothing to do with it. And if you're upset with the direction that things have been going, these mainstream parties are why we're here. They're the people that have brought us here. So there's no way that they're going to lead us out of the position that we're in. It's imperative that we vote on principle. It's imperative that we vote for an option that actually represents what we believe. And we're getting to a time now where there's enough people that we might actually get somewhere. And so it's important that we use this as a stepping stone. We may not win it all right away, and the devil is happy to take his inch whenever he can get it, and we need to start taking inches and feet and miles for the cause. And we do that by supporting people that support us.
Right. Yeah, and I really do think that what's been happening at Queen's Park. We were just talking about the critical race theory issue. It's shocking that you would think that an overwhelming majority of conservatives in Queen's Park would take a stand against that. And I'm not sure if most parents or viewers who are watching are parents, if they totally understand what this is all about. CRT is extremely divisive, and it's basically the blame game that if you're white, heterosexual, male particularly, you're basically a racist. You are a racist without even knowing it. And so the very thought that this would be taught in our schools to our children is absolutely astonishing to me. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I know obviously, Derek, you're opposed to that. And it sounds like Queen's Park is overwhelmingly for it. I mean, including the Liberals and the NDP. Can we talk a little bit about the damage that this potentially can inflict on our children, and what the consequences and the fruit of CRT is?
Yeah, so CRT is something that's, on the nightly news, literally in the United States frequently, and it's been a, electoral battleground in many states, but it's not something that's spoken of too often here in Canada. But the basic idea is, again, it's kind of it's a combination of a neo-Marxist but also postmodern viewpoint that basically, instead of talking about class warfare as sort of a description of all things, they're using kind of racial and sexual categories to explain everything. So if things aren't going well in your life, it's because you are an oppressor and you're being oppressed by people who oppress, by oppressors, and they have a rigid category. So oppression, the evidence for oppression is not actual actions of oppression. It's outcomes. So if they say, oh well, such and such group is not performing statistically according to how we feel, whether it be men or women or whatever, and or black or white or whatever color, and they say, so it must be a function of oppression. Therefore, people who are white or male or Christian or straight are oppressing people who are gay or black or female or a combination of these things. And they also, and it's more than just a personal thing, it's also like a cultural thing. So for example, Canada has always been racist because it was founded by colonial white racist people. And that's why there's so many problems here, because they're racist, and whether they know it or not, they're steeped in the system. So therefore they're subconsciously racist. And so we have to actively sort of work against these people to give people a leg up. So if now this is sort of far down the road, but the ultimate example of this will be something like, Tony, you make, and I'm making this up, but you make $100,000 a year, but someone else only makes 60, and because you're male and Christian and straight, we need to divvy things up. So we're going to take money from you and give it to this other group. Now, this is what we're going to see down the road, but we're already seeing this obsession with equal outcome and blaming any discrepancy in outcome on oppression, whether they see it or not. The fact that there's unequal outcomes. Now, of course, we all know in life there's a lot of things that impact your outcome more than just your gender and your skin color and those kinds of things. And in fact, I would say those things impact your outcomes in life very minimally. What does impact your outcome in life is your attitude, your persistence. Blind chance and fate act upon all of us, of course, as Solomon has noted, and also things like your educational choices and the people that you hang around with. So and the hours that you work. I mean, there's a big debate about differential wages between men and women, but when you take a look at factors that go into wages, hours worked, danger on the job, whether it's a hard science degree or a soft degree, all of these things play into income. So when you look at all of these supposed discrepancies, there's often other reasons other than sheer blind intolerance. Right. And what the critical race theory is doing is positing oppression for everything that may be going wrong or in someone's life. And it's a dangerous thing, because we've always believed in our society on a rules-based order where everybody is equal under the law. So if Tony has to pay 10% in tax, I should have to pay 10% in tax if our circumstances are the same. So what they're doing is they're trying to change equality into equity. And equality means it's the same rules for everybody. Equity means there may be 1,000 rules different for everybody, so long as we all end up at the same place. And that does not promote hard work. It does not promote the types of things that have made our country great. We need to make sure that the lane is open for people to succeed, and we don't want to be telling them why they can't succeed or why they should be blaming others. We want to be giving them the tools to succeed, and this is robbing our children of that opportunity.
Yeah, and it all comes back to the difference between equality of outcome and the equality of opportunity. Everyone has an opportunity if they apply themselves. The work ethic that God laid down in Genesis 3, that by the sweat of your brow you shall eat your bread, that if you don't work, you don't eat. So the idea that if you work and you apply yourself, you can become a doctor, you can become an engineer, you can become a lawyer. But the equality of outcome, as you rightly pointed out, Derek, is a system that basically wants to make everyone the same, irrespective of whether they've applied themselves or if they've put in the work. It's the same thing between whether you're qualified to be a doctor or whether you should be a doctor because of your skin color, or a pilot to fly with United Airlines. So I think that this oppressor-oppression dichotomy, and this is really what we're hearing today in our schools and even in our governments. Maybe, Mike, you can talk towards, as you know, Michael, in the church, CRT also has wreaked havoc, particularly with the Southern Baptist Convention. Maybe can you talk towards that as well? Because I'm afraid a lot of our young people in our churches are imbibing at this fountain, and they are seeing the world through the lenses that Derek just explained or described.
Yeah, I want to jump off of what Derek said and then go in and explain that the other side of critical theory, and either critical race theory or just any form of critical theory, what everybody has to realize is that there has to be a mediator, or there has to be an arbiter in between the oppressed and the oppressor. And that arbiter is always conveniently politicians and a big old fat government.
Yeah.
So it's like the vision that they're promoting flies right in the face of the biblical mandate, which is that the family is supposed to be fruitful and multiply. Any proponent of this type of theory of outcomes or control of outcomes, they become collectivists by nature, which then says, hey, look, in order to make it fair, whether you work or you don't work, which, by the way, we have in our country, on the table right now, the universal income.
Yeah.
Look at whether you work or you don't work, or whether you're black or you're Chinese, or whether you're a male or a female. Look, we've got a solution for your problem. You're all awful people. You're either an oppressed or an oppressor. That means that you're either a jerk or you're either incompetent. We've got the best solution for you, Tony and Derek. I got a sale for you today, and the solution is make the government bigger so that we can distribute everything fairly.
Right.
And if you put up your hand and you go, but wait a minute, I know enough schmuck politicians, and I know enough, ethnic slurs. Should I make other type of? I know enough politicians and bureaucrats that they're just human beings full of sin as well, just like me, just me and my family. So the solution doesn't work. That has been the age-old problem of this theory, is that even if the world of oppressor-oppressed that they imagine existed, their solution is erroneous, because all it is to build big government, and then government becomes the oppressor. Okay, now moving into how this is seeped into the church. And
Michael, can I just make a quick point on what you're saying there? And I think even more than that, the more insidious thing is that the very people who are saying that this exists are positing themselves as sort of the high priests that can mediate and determine exactly who's being oppressed and who isn't. So there's a class of the new elite, the people who can parse all this new terminology, who are positing themselves as the leaders. So if anybody was going to reach into Tony's wallet and take money and put it elsewhere, it would be these self-professed gurus of this movement, which frankly I wouldn't trust with anything, let alone running our government. So it's even worse than just average politicians. It's the people who are selling this stuff would then be the leaders of the movement, this revolution that they're trying to create.
Right. Tony, I think you and I are on a similar signal feed, and every once in a while, one of the guys on that feed will say, "Hey, if you believe that, I've got a deal for you," and then they make a joke about what type of deal they're trying to sell. The other issue is that this has seeped into the church, and Tony, in his book called The Fault Lines, Vodi Bakum has, talked very specifically about how there is there's a dividing line. You can almost look at, like, I've got the book up in front of me, and
Yeah.
you can name the list of evangelicals that are on one side, and then you can name the list of evangelicals and maybe some more guys in the Reformed camp that are on the other side. And I appreciate Vodi's synopsis of the situation, where he says our problem, and so he's talking about the church now, is a lack of clarity and charity in our debate over the place, priority, practice, and definition of justice.
Mm.
And so I think that's the message I would like to leave the church and any of the young adults listening, or parents, or whoever is listening. God's definition of justice is be righteous, do that which is right before the Lord. And so every time I have a moral decision to make or a judicial decision to make, there is a full revealed decision, or certainly there is a decision that has been made, or a principle in Scripture that can be drawn from, that would allow the individual to make a righteous decision. And what social justice is, and that's where critical theory comes out of, and it's a part of the social justice movement. It takes the idea of justice and it warps it. And it's really confusing, because similar to the, communists of old, all of these terms like equality and equity and these principles of caring and compassion, they come from Scripture. So so everything that is spoken in those names, we go, wait a minute, that's got to be biblical, because it sounds so biblical. But the reality of it is, there's been this twist, and instead of saying, no, justice is doing that which is morally right, and then upholding that, which means punishing evil and promoting righteous behavior, they've tethered justice more to these human ideas of collectivism. And you just have to run from them. Young adults, you just have to think through them. You have to ask the very simple question: can I find this principle really, as I look, not just a quick, over quote of one verse, right? Tony, you and I've grown up long enough. Derek, you probably had this too, right? 20 years ago, the quotable verse on earth was, judge not lest ye be judged. And that was, whenever you were in a conversation, immediately someone's a Christian because they could quote Jesus on that.
Yeah.
And then now it's like Romans 13. It's because people don't dig deeply into Scripture in order to find out what a real concept is. And I'm saying clearly, you can find definitions of justice and actions of justice to model and follow in Scripture. And that's where the church is being led astray by this seductive language that seems to care for people, but really just lends the hand to a heavy state to say, do what we want you to do.
Yeah, which sounds like really it's equivocation. We're using words like justice and goodness and righteousness, and of course, the way that the social justice warriors use that language, of course, it's equivocating. And our country has been based on the idea of the supremacy of God. I mean, the preamble to the Canada Act states that whereas Canada is founded upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and I think the reality is today that we don't really believe that. I believe that, and you gentlemen believe that, but the way that the laws in this country are being legislated, they certainly don't reflect that. And I think that preamble and practically every preamble to every Judeo-Christian constitution, including the Declaration of Independence, recognizes the supremacy of God, and God is the one who defines us as human beings. And it seems to me that we've removed that base, that ground of morality, which is God himself. And so without God, you're left to relativism. you're left to all of the machinations of men, social justice or progressivism and so forth. So I think those are very important points, very valid points. One,
Tony, if I might just jump
go
in on
ahead,
that, just
please.
to give a real down to earth example. Just turn on your television and ask yourself how many times the idea of lust is sold under the name of love.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not even talking about anything overly political. I'm just saying you turn on anything and the replacement of love, which is self-sacrificial, it is committed, it is done, sexual acts are done in the beauty of holy matrimony. Just look at how many substitutes are out there for the idea of lust versus love. It's just sold all the time. And so you get to a point, and the Christian gets to the point where they go, well, wait a minute. They say it is love. And you get confused, even though there's no metrics other than them just saying the same thing at you time and time again. And it's exactly what you say. They associate the one with the other. So you eventually get confused.
Right.
You know,
Do you
and I
want to
just
add
want
in?
to,
Go ahead, Derek.
yeah, I just wanted to jump in. You know, one of the problems that people need to realize with, you know, the social justice and the critical race theory and things like this is that the ultimate aim of these people is political. So, you know, someone who's interested in doing justice should ask, okay, okay, so what do we do? You know, where's the bonds of the oppressed that we can loosen? And they'll say, okay, we'll come to this protest. You know, use this language, wear this T-shirt, vote Democrat or vote liberal. There's no actual thing that they're prescribing that's literally helping people who are oppressed. And you know, I remember when I was at school in Kingston, and there would always be people outside picketing for different things, not necessarily rallies, but you'd have people out there promoting basic income or things like this. And I remember I was going to the grocery store one day, and I've often had a policy just myself, and I don't, people can agree or disagree, but if I see someone begging for money on the side of the road, I give them a couple of coins. Okay, so I'm not trying to get into the debate of whether you should or shouldn't do that, but I remember I was going by and someone was looking for money, and I gave him a couple of coins, and I saw that this person who was the person was advocating for basic income, handing out tracts and stuff, like right by this person. And I could see that I caught that person off guard. They'd obviously been there for a period of time, hours, whatever it was. And it was as if it never occurred to them to actually give this person anything. And then so they got all flustered and started looking for money, and then gave, this person money. But it was very clear to me that this person probably doesn't really help people. Like, she was standing beside this homeless person for hours, and it didn't even occur to her to like buy her some food or give her some money. And yet she's campaigning ostensibly for the poor. And so that, it just really struck me as an example of, these people are about politics. They're about politics and pushing their agendas. They're not about actually helping people. And that's the thing you have to see with this social justice. It's always a political aim, a political end, and rarely is there actually, hey, let's go out and feed the hungry. Let's go out and, visit the sick. Very rarely is there that element to it. It's always about a political objective. And so I think that should be something that people, take note of as they're watching this.
Right. I mean, historically, it was the Christian church that created the concept of the hospital, particularly going back to the 4th century with Basil of Caesarea, Basil the Great. I mean, the Romans and Greeks had their hospitals, but that was only for the wealthy and the affluent. But when you think of the modern day concept of hospitality, and so forth, these were things that emerged out of the church because of the compassion that Jesus showed for the poor and for the sick and so forth and so on. And today it's turned around as, well, Christianity is an oppressive male chauvinist religion that the colonizers brought to this country, and so forth and so on. So everything seems to be that if it's Judeo-Christian in its origins, or if it comes from a Christian worldview, it is automatically misogynist. It's homophobic. It is repressive, oppressive, and so forth. So it's quite interesting that the cultural Marxists, when they came to America from the Frankfurt School, one of the first places they hit was Columbia University, and through the academia, they influenced America in the space of 20 years or so. And then, of course, they went into Hollywood and started influencing the media outlets. But it's interesting. It always seems to me that those in the so-called social justice movement seem to always tell you, they never tell you what they're for. Everything's about attacking the right, or attacking the conservatives, or attacking those who have a Christian worldview. So we're back to that oppressor oppressed again. I know a lot of folks, I think somebody in the chat said, oh, that has nothing to do with Marxism. It has everything to do with Marxism. Karl Marx spoke of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the capitalist versus the working class. The oppressors were the capitalists, the oppressed were the bourgeoisie. And then, of course, later Theodor Adorno and George Lukács and many of the neo-Marxists, they used that language, but they applied it to culture. And they started bringing up the victimization of homosexuals and every other group against the so-called Christian right. So we got here by lies, and hopefully we'll get out of this with truth.
Yeah, and one other thing I just will quickly point out in regards to the social justice movement is marrying with politics and becoming itself a religion, and I think that's something that a Christian needs to take note of. Mm-hmm. And the one way that the social justice movement is antithetical to Christianity is that it basically posits that your outcome in life is based on things that you can't control. It's based on your past, your skin color, the structure of society. But what Christianity has done is, and before that, just the Bible generally, it teaches that it doesn't matter who you are. If you follow God's guidance and commandments, you can do great things. Mm-hmm. And it explicitly teaches against the fact that parents should be answerable for the sins of their fathers or their forefathers, right? It's like, you will answer for your own actions. Mm-hmm. And you can also be freed from your past through faith in Jesus Christ. And this ideology specifically undercuts that. There can be it doesn't matter what your past is. If you're going to be a Christian, Christ can break through whatever you've been through, and you can live a new and victorious life. But the social justice puts people under an immense load of external restrictions and says, you know what? You're nothing but a product of your race and your gender and your sexual identity, and you're part of a system that is so oppressive it needs to be overthrown. That's not a hopeful message. And in fact, it's completely anti-Christian.
Yes. Yeah. It just reminds me of Ezekiel 18, where, God speaks to Ezekiel and says that the son shall not be punished for the sins of the fathers, but each soul that sin, it shall die. So the soul that sins against God, they are morally responsible. And yet today, what do we keep hearing? Well, when your ancestors came over here, I came from a very humble Portuguese family, poor Portuguese family. I never got my white privilege card in the mail. And my parents really worked hard to pay their taxes and so forth. But today, it's guilt by association. Did you want to add anything to that, Mike?
I think like Derek said it so well there. And Tony, I know you're hard on this issue. Like, we need to be people who live by faith in the living God who sent his son, the Lord Jesus Christ, to die and pay for our sins, who spoke the wisdom of God and the law of God and the revelation of God, and perfectly gave us an example, died and was resurrected, and now lives as King of the universe, and is in command of this universe in a kingdom that is already established on this earth through the life of the church, and will at some point come in its fruition. And the church, for a very long time, has tried to be eclectic, or has tried to subordinate the word of God to evidentialism, or to expertise, or
Mhm.
to the smartest philosopher in the room. And I know that the two of you have lived this. There are many times where we must say, I have greater wisdom in this moment than you do. And someone say, well, why? Because I'm holding in my hands the word of God, and the word of God gives clear instructions or warnings or examples right here about this issue. And so we really have to live by faith, even though all of these other ideas are seductive. And that has practical outcomes. One of the outcomes that Derek was talking about, um, you can be redeemed in Christ, and then you can live a victorious life. It's a big deal for
Mhm.
someone's family, for someone's work habit, for anything to move from like a place where they're hiding a habitual sin and
Yes.
navigating that world, to like the tangential benefits
Mm.
that come through abiding by the word of God. And it's the same thing politically. It's the same thing in every sphere. When we have a whole discipline of life that is trying to protect and hedge around and overcome sin by human ways, it just leads to more slavery by other humans. It is only through taking personal responsibility and walking by faith in the Lord Jesus and his word,
Mhm.
by which, as independent, responsible operators, as long as the laws of the land are fair and just, I have a great ability in my liberty to flourish and to do God's cultural command, which is to be fruitful and multiply, to multiply my children, to multiply my wealth, to multiply my holdings,
Mhm.
to multiply my evangelism, to multiply my work in my church. All of this happens when the government is limited in what it can do to oppress us.
Mm.
But you need a civil, faithful, God-fearing citizenry in order for that thriving to happen. And it does happen when we see people walk away from their sin habits through faith in Christ,
Mhm.
and or we even see just a civil government being able to curtail legally what people are doing immorally. We
Mhm.
see local flourishing, independent responsibility benefiting people.
And I think historically speaking, that really is what made the West great, was the application of those very principles that you just mentioned, Mike. And I think it's also fair to say that our country and the United States and many Western countries, once again, started off with the acknowledgement of God,
Yeah.
that all men are created equal, given inalienable rights by their Creator in the American Declaration. The Canadian Charter maintains the supremacy of God, and so forth. And for heaven's sakes, gentlemen, our Queen, the Queen, our head of state, is the defender of the faith. That's one of her official titles, and that faith is the Christian faith in its context. And so, I mean, God is splattered all over our parliament. I mean, references to "He shall rule from sea to sea," which is our motto, the Canadian, our Canadian coat of arms, bears that verse from Psalm 72, referring to the Lord Jesus Christ as the King who shall rule from sea to sea. And so that is what I think made our countries great. The degeneracy in our countries, I think, and I say countries in terms of the West, I think that degeneracy has occurred when we've turned our backs and trampled on those pure foundations that made us great. You want to add to that, Derek?
No, that's a very good analysis, and I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, we have to realize that well, we are in the midst of a cultural battle, and we are in the midst of a political battle. At its base is a spiritual battle, and the battle is, what principles, what God will be, in charge of our country. And there's,
Mm-hmm.
The God of death, the God of personal pleasure, the God of all the things that we're seeing that are going wrong in our country. Or there's the God that we look to for inspiration when we founded this country, the God that we've looked to inspiration for for many thousands of years as we've, adopted
Right.
the principles and institutions that
Mm-hmm.
have made our country a great country and other countries a great country as well. And I don't think it's an accident that as we throw, God to the sidelines, that many of the liberties and freedoms that we've enjoyed before are also being excised as well. I think they're related.
Right. Okay, gentlemen, I wanted to see if we can get some comments in here. Folks, if you're joining us, I'm joined by Michael Thiessen and Derek Sloan. You guys are welcome to ask any questions. So if you would like to ask a question, put a Q in the chat box or the word question in caps. That way I'll be able to grab it and share it with our viewers. Just a couple of comments. So we have Charles Edwards points out here about the WEF. Doug Ford was listed as a member of the WEF. Do you guys want to say anything about the World Economic Forum? Is that germane to our discussion?
So I believe that statement that's on your screen there is true in terms of Doug Ford's affiliation. Who knows what that actually means with respect to that? But certainly the World Economic Forum is an organization that is promoting a lot of negative things, or promoting a lot of the things that we've been speaking against today. And we have to be very careful as a country that we're not entangling ourselves with, international organizations that are not, working for the best interest of Canadian citizens. So I'm not a member of the WEF. You'll never find a picture of me on their website, either now or before. So I appreciate that comment there.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Mike, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Well, a lot of people are still hesitant to admit the influence of the WEF, and I think what has transpired in the last few months, very specifically around the way that, earlier on, Tony, you said something really early on in the podcast, and you said, I think that Doug is lifting the mandates because of the election. Well, it's interesting. The whole world seems to be lifting the mandates right at the same time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's interesting. No matter what country you could look at, they were lock and step, hand and glove with each other. Ontario was doing the same things that like the world was very unified. And I think that what we've seen, particularly when it came down to the Ontario remaining in lockdown and being right in step with the Emergency Measures Act being laid out and all those things. The reality of it is the World Economic Forum is a economic think tank that invites leaders from all around the world to consider solutions for the world. And I think it's quite evident that the leaders have gone and agreed and accepted those proposed solutions. And this is a major problem because, of course, the World Economic Forum is not accountable to Canadian citizens, certainly not accountable to Ontarians. So I think people need to keep watching and keep listening. I think that everyone's kind of going to take a sigh of relief, but it's called the World Economic Forum, not the World COVID Forum. So as I have read the Great Reset, they want structural and behavioral change in order to move towards a greener climate, because that is really their push. And they want structural economic changes and structural behavioral changes to happen. So yeah, that's problematic if Doug truly is listed as a member. And I'm glad to hear Derek say that he's not and wouldn't be one.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that too. Of course, we know Justin Trudeau is, and a number of the members of the Conservative Party of Canada federally.
Doesn't Justin just wear a T-shirt now? He
said one of them had, "I'm a global citizen" or something. I'm part of the global village. So he's definitely a globalist. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And as you know, the tax, there's another tax coming in April 1st, this Friday. And of course, we're going to be hit again at the pumps. But that's okay, he says. That's all right. So yeah, I keep thinking of what the WF said, that you'll own nothing and be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have another
Sure.
question here. Derek, did you want to add to that before we go on to another question?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the fact is the WF is pushing some very strange things, and I was just watching a little clip of Klaus Schwab on a show in France where he was talking about how they literally want to combine the physical with the digital. So they want
Yes.
to combine humans and machines, and literally, and this sounds crazy to talk about, but this is out of Klaus Schwab's own mouth. They want to start inputting microchips first, maybe on your clothes, then in your skin, but ultimately in your brain. And this is what he was saying. I mean, this is not conspiracy, and that's not a direction that I'm interested in going. And there's a lot more to that could be discussed as well.
Yeah, it's
Can I just make
transhumanism, right? Go ahead, Mike.
Can I make a quick point on that?
Sure.
Just so you know, if you want to go to horizons.gc.ca, we actually have exploring biodigital convergence. We actually have a department in our government that is exploring biodigital convergence.
Yeah.
Policy Horizons is what it's called.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very strange. It's almost like Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tom Cruise with the Minority Report, where it's incredible. It's transhumanism, really. It's man. It's the lie of Eden that you shall be as God, knowing good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so man has, from the Garden of Eden, has tried to usurp the right of his creator, to dethrone God and enthrone himself. And so we see it. I mean, it's so in your face. And I don't know if you've been following Yuval, Professor Yuval, who is one of the advocates for the WEF. He's openly admitted that we are our own God. We are our own designers. We don't need this God up in the sky. So some of the language coming out of there is so antithetical to the Christian worldview and outrightly antichrist, really.
Absolutely.
We have a question here, and this is a very controversial topic. We have a question from Thomas Walling. A perfect example of institutional racism and how it can affect outcome and the generational impacts of it. Nobody seems to be mentioning residential schools. So this has been, of course, a very, very controversial subject in terms of the federal government in particular. I mean, of course, this hits home to everybody, not just federally. But can you gentlemen maybe talk a little bit about the whole issue with the residential schools and of course we had all those burning churches out west. And I think our prime minister said, "Well, I don't condone it, but I can understand why they would do that." And I think Gerald Butts said something similar. Can you gentlemen talk towards this? Because this is obviously it's a hot point with our First Nations people.
You first or me, Derek?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I can talk.
Well, look, I'll go first in the sense that I think this is where critical theory has been alive and well in Canada for much longer than Canadians have been aware. Because for my entire lifetime, there has been a number of assumptions in our Canadian culture that are now really coming to life, and actually people are acting quite reactionary to it. So, for example, one of the assumptions in my lifetime is that our reserve system is beneficial to Indigenous individuals in Canada, Indigenous Canadians. And I've been doing a little bit of research on that lately, and I just came across the fact that I was not aware that the Indigenous cannot own property on a reserve. So the reserves were originally created to be traditional hunt grounds, and people were not allowed to live on the reserve, but rather hunt the reserve and then live near the reserve. And slowly but surely, people just started migrating onto the reserve for ease of trade and for convenience. But if you're somebody who's living on a reserve in Canada, you can't own property on that reserve. That means that you're getting a house that can and sometimes is taken away from you, that you are not personally responsible for, nor are you personally going to benefit from the resale of that home. And so we have this conundrum. And so the reason why I'm bringing up the reserve issue is that there is a personification within Canada that, again, that all Indigenous individuals are virtuous. They have a robust, well-developed worldview, and it is this outside Western tradition of law and order that has constantly and continually oppressed them. And the residential schools are an example that is used time and time again in order to remind Canadians very quickly that everyone outside of the Indigenous people are oppressors, and these are the oppressed people of Canada. So this has been going on. This critical theory has been alive and well in Canada for very long. And so in the same way that this summer, during Canada Day, there were marches to mourn these graves that were found. In the same way that there was this immense overreaction in Canada with very little investigation as to what these graves were or what they constituted. We have the same thing, I believe, going on with the residential schools. Yes, there's some historical evidence of serious abuse that we would not want to repeat. There were some cultural mistakes that went on as far as like conformed behavior that had nothing to do with morality. It had to do with looking Western. But at the same time, we have to admit that we are all sinful people, and there were mistakes made, but also part of the reason for many of the actions that we've seen people with working and trying to get young people off of the reserves is the condition of the children themselves on the reserves. And so there's this historical tension where there's definitely some truth to the fact that were abuses and errors made. But then there was also this real need at times for people to rescue children off of the reserves. And then now we have this, well, what do we do? And of course, the collectivist, the critical answer is, well, we're going to pay for our past mistakes forever. And of course, if I'm anybody receiving benefit from that, I have a vested interest to make sure that narrative goes hard and long and far, because I get to benefit from that. So I do think this is probably one of the biggest topics that we are going to have to dive in historically. We are going to have to then look at ideas of moving forward that I think have to tackle this very alive and well critical theory being lived out right before us.
Derek?
That was actually really good, Michael. And, I'm not sure if I can add to that too much. I would say that part of the reason why we're having, ongoing generational issues with Indigenous communities, and they exist. I mean, there's no question. I believe personally is that we have been treating them different from the beginning, right? So it's kind of like the original, residential school and so on, school system, the reserve system. It's again predicated on kind of an identity politics basis. And so there was absolutely mistakes that were made in that process. There was absolutely, terrible abuse that occurred. There's no question. But is the answer to that to, do more sort of identity politicking where we're, singling people out based on their ancestry and providing more sort of diverse and special treatment? I mean, I would say no. Now, with respect to the Indigenous question generally, and let's just forget, critical race theory and all of these ideologies that really don't help anybody solve problems. We need to look at, how can we provide good paying jobs to these people, and there's been many times where, resource projects would go through reserves or near reserves and provide economic benefits to people on reserves. And yet these same people that are social justice warriors are there campaigning to shut these things down. So I think we need to stop worrying about blame and stop worrying about the past and stop worrying about ideology and start looking at how do we get our country on its feet again? How do we get these people on their feet? So I'm not saying, just because your past doesn't have to define you doesn't mean that, generational, curses can't transmit down the line. Anybody who's had, generational issues with, alcoholism and things like this, these are real things. So we believe, of course, that faith in Christ can free you from your past, can free you from your circumstances. But, sin and these kinds of things, they also leave a legacy. So we're not denying that there's a legacy that can impact people. But we also have to, instead of focusing on that, why don't we focus on how we can lift people up and how we can help people get past whatever historical things or things in their youth or family that are holding them back. So instead of saying there's nothing you can do, it's the system's rigged against you, let's look at how we can help people make better choices and get back on their feet.
Actually, Tony, if I could also just jump in on that. Look at how the question is framed, and look at how it immediately makes none of us want to say Indigenous people are the exact same as everybody else. They got to get out. They got to work hard. They've got to live lawful lives, and they've got to own private property. They've got to be invested in their families. They've got to be virtuous sexually. They've got to look at how the idea of saying institutional racism has been such a problem. And look at this example. Look at how that immediately wants us to be racist. Like it immediately compels us to racism and making assumptions about Indigenous people that are not true. Either making them overly virtuous or overly a victim and not calling them to personal individual responsibility. So that is exactly why it will always come back to a government needing to arbitrate then, because the reality of it is critical race theory actually leads to more racism. We've been saying it implicitly throughout this podcast, and that is all people are created equal before God. All people are fallen, sinful individuals. People can be redeemed through Jesus Christ and faith in him. If people are not redeemed, then their sinfulness will be and ought to be curtailed, restrained by fair law. That's what we've said. Except when someone says, but what about that race? Because they've been treated poorly. Now we're going to be racist towards them now. It completely leads itself into racism until what, 200 years from now, when Caucasian people get to have their turn and claim the being the oppressed. So this whole dialogue leads to racism, when the reality of it is we are all created with the ability and the need to act and be responsible. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the common denominator here is that, as Paul says in Romans 3, we have all sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's not one who does good, no, not one. But there's a measure of hypocrisy amongst our political elites. I mean, we know what China's doing with the Uyghurs, the Chinese Muslims who have been basically taken. They've been put in concentration camps to try to deprogram them from their Muslim faith and become devoted and dedicated to the Communist Party of China. And so it's quite interesting that the very people who will say, well, look what you're doing, you're marginalizing these people, you're committing human rights violations. They know full well what's going on in mainland China. And yet there's not a peep. I mean, our prime minister admires their dictatorial government, but there's not a peep on what's going on. Or even the systemic invasion of Yemen by Saudi Arabia. No talk about that. Or with Kabul, when Biden decided to pull out all the troops and leaving all these people behind in despair. There is so much hypocrisy that goes on amongst our elites that there is no consistency. At least the Christian worldview is consistent. It says, look, we're all God's image bearers. All human beings are God's image bearers. We're all corrupt. The Aboriginal peoples also fought and invaded each other's territories and killed each other's tribes and raped each other's wives and so forth and so on.
but so have all humans throughout history in their, in military campaigns and invasions. And so with the biblical worldview, there's at least this consistency that we're all wicked people outside of God's grace without repentance. So it just seems to me that, our prime minister talks about unvaccinated people being racist, misogynists, and how should we tolerate these people? And yet he wore blackface at least 3 times. And so it's this type of hypocrisy I think Canadians are just tired of,
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I just want to clarify, again, for anyone that's watching, we're not, and I don't, I did not interpret Michael's comments as targeting anybody. He's just making a point that, and it led from my point that, part of the reason why we're in this position that we are is that we've had kind of 2 sets of rules for, Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. And, you remember early on in Pierre Trudeau's career before he was prime minister, he was behind this idea to, get rid of the Indian Act and to really bring, kind of one class of citizen to all Canadians. So I think there's an element to kind of this 2-track citizenhood, which, and again, critical race theory is like 80-track citizenhood, right? It's like whatever your specific quotient of oppressor oppressee is, that's your track. It's like 80,000 tracks, right? But this different track citizenship has led to different track outcomes and the generational issues that we're seeing through Indigenous versus non-Indigenous Canadians.
Just a word of encouragement here from one of our American viewers. Hello, Dr. Costa. Thank you for this important interview discussion. Sending support and prayers to you from the U.S. So thank you very much, Summer. We really appreciate that. So we do have many supporters in the United States who also understand the situation here in Canada. And I think you're also aware, Derek, of the fact that the state of Ohio is talking about putting Canada on a list of religious persecutors. I thought I'd never live to see the day when my country would actually be listed as a persecutor of religious freedom. But here we are.
Yeah, though it's remarkable, and we certainly live in strange times, no question.
Yeah, we have a question here. I think it's more of a Hegelian question. Hegel's dialectic. Can you discuss the dangers of dialectical materialism of those who hold the levels of power today?
It's a good one, Michael. You go first.
Could the questioner, Armor of Truth, please define dialectical materialism and its source and author?
Okay, so maybe I'll just jump in because I'm familiar with what he's saying.
Good.
But it's a philosophical, right, Derek? Hegel's philosophy.
Yes. So it's
Marx.
So it's Hegel's philosophy of thesis, antithesis, and the Hegelian dialectic. And I can mouth these terms, but I am not a philosopher, although I've been around long enough to pick up on some things. But so basically, and Tony, jump in here if I'm mistaken, but the basic point of what Hegel is talking about is you kind of control both sides of the argument, but you're pushing in the direction that you want to go. So it's kind of like you have a quote unquote left and right, but they're both talking about the same things, and they're moving towards a middle ground, which is kind of equally unacceptable to real people like us. So is that a good kind of summary of the problem that this person's pointing out? Is that fair, do you think?
I think so. I know the questioner. I think that's a fair summation there, Derek. Well,
if you know the questioner, tell them to use nicer terms when they're asking questions. Like,
be less philosophical.
Yeah. So okay. So maybe now. So I'm guessing sort of the subtext of this question, in a way, is probably they may be saying different things, but they're moving in the same direction. How do we change that? Is that kind of? Do you think that's sort of the danger that?
Yeah, I think that's where he's leading the question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I believe for whatever reason that all of those who hold the levers of power, whether it's political or leaders of corporations or in academia, they've all kind of bought into these ideologies that we're talking about right now. It's these neo-Marxist, postmodern ideologies that are becoming more and more oppressive, more and more totalitarian, and they're taking the power out of the individual and placing it into corporations, committees, away from the average person. And I think we're seeing the destruction of democracy. We're seeing the destruction of human-led, community-led politics into sort of governing the chattel, right? I mean, we're seeing all kinds of things happen that are destroying our liberties. We're seeing the courts are thus far in any event, impotent to stop it. We're seeing all the machinery of society being, useless to uphold, our freedoms. We're seeing, the trucker convoy, people getting ripped from their vehicles, their bank accounts are being seized, and there's no one standing up to this. Yes, there's people who are against it, but we're not seeing any wins in court. We're not seeing. It's just happening, and it's emboldening our oppressors, right? Like it's kind of like might makes right. We're moving into a time where it's like, people, the only thing people respect is the crass use of power. Like people don't seem to respect anymore anything. They don't respect consistency, logic, morality. The only thing they respect is sort of the crass bludgeoning of power. And, that's where we're at. And, I think that, the Hegelian dialectic, of course, has played into this. It's enabled people to, push certain agendas. But we do live in a dangerous time. And that's why we need new political options. You can't put new wine into old wineskins. Mm-hmm. And all of these mainstream parties are old wineskins. They need to be completely either dismantled and rebuilt, or preferably starting something new like we're doing.
Right.
Okay. So I don't want to end on a note of not knowing anything about a subject. So Tony, I just went online and I Googled the definition and I brought up and I read a paragraph or two. Here would be my critique and the dangers of dialectical materialism. I am currently reading a book called The Changing World Order. And it's an economic study on economic cycles and how likely we are at the end of a major economic cycle right now because the U.S. dollar is losing confidence and the Chinese yen is rising in confidence in the world. And so you have the reserve currency and battling a new rival growing economy. So the premise of the book is that we've gone through these cycles many, many times. And if you want to invest money, you have to figure out where you are in the cycle. And that's right. And most people can't invest well because they don't imagine where they are in the cycle because they won't admit that cycles happen and things change. But where the idea in this guy's book comes out, I can see he's a dialectical materialist, is that he just basically says, look, it's evolution. It's society just slowly but surely getting better. And it's the same cycle. And we learn a little bit each time, except right in the middle of everything, he constantly talks about things like, well, if you get to the end of a cycle and your culture is really depraved, it leads to civil war and unrest. But sometimes you get to the end of an economic cycle and there's morals and there's the culture is rich. And he literally in the book names what would make a culture strong and ready for like a peaceful transition. He goes literally to the church, religious morality and education, like knowledge of history. And so on one hand, he's like, yeah, this is just rambling along towards spiraling down towards, a progressively better economy because we learn lots. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't, there's nothing moral about it. It's just going to happen. But then in the middle of his amoral positions, he's acknowledging that, well, wait a minute, like, well, yeah, economic cycles happen, but if people are honest and civil and lawful and hardworking, then the economy grows. And if you're at the end of a cycle and it's because you've spent with decadence and you've gotten debt, and no politicians are honest in order to end the debt cycle. So he's got all of these moral premises going on where he's ready to just say, no, it's a cycle that'll happen forever. Yet right in the middle of the indicators, he's ignoring opportunities for morality and opportunities for godly behavior. So
Right.
then I agreeing with Derek, if you don't believe in any morality, then the state has to scoop up control and try to control all of that.
Yeah. And I think let me see what he said here. You actually, okay. So he says, you guys actually addressed it well since I originally asked the question. And so
that's very kind of him. Maybe he responded before I did, I responded. That's great.
Right. There is a question here for Derek. Someone's asking a question. Sorry, that's not the one I had in mind here. Just give me a minute. There was a question about taxation here. Yes, here. This is from Jaco. I consider taxation as theft and that all government funding should be voluntary, like a charity. I would like to hear Derek Sloan's take on why I should vote.
Yeah. So, so if you don't vote, then obviously you have no say. And I think that every vote is valuable. Our government is the closest representation of, kind of limited government, limited taxation, things like this. I've actually thought of your idea, and it might be possible theoretically, but we certainly, at the very least, need to move towards a smaller government and a smaller bureaucratic sort of oversight. So our party is certainly far more in that direction than any other mainstream party, and so you should support a party like that. And I just want to say to people, there's multiple ways that voting for a party like ours is helpful. Okay. So let's say we don't win. Okay. Let's say one person, two people win a seat, or maybe nobody wins a seat. And you might say, okay, well, I wasted my vote. How does that help? Here's how it helps. The more votes we get, the more that you turn the eyes of establishment parties. So if we get 7, 8, 9, 10% of the vote, the conservatives are going to be staying up all night for 2 weeks, wondering what the heck just happened. They're going to be like, that's a huge loss for them. So they're going to be adjusting their tactics to move more to the right to eat our lunch, which is good for everybody who wants people to be more like us. The other advantage is that if you vote for us, it keeps us as a going concern. So, when it comes to numbers of votes cast, you get, essentially rebates or subsidies from the government if you cross a certain threshold. So if we get a certain threshold of votes, then we get subsidies back on a per vote basis that enables us to keep our organization going, right? So then we're now an organization that is campaigning, traveling. Hopefully one or more of us have a spot in Parliament, in the legislature to be debating. But there's many ways in which voting for us, even if we don't quote unquote form government, there's many lesser wins that are still of great value to the Christian community.
Do you want to add anything to that, Michael?
I can certainly understand with the sentiment about government spending way too much money and taking from the family. I think that if we were to look to a biblical model, we certainly have the warning of the kings exploiting taxes. Mm-hmm. We certainly know that even in Roman times, the max would have been around a 10% mark. So I certainly would like to see taxes reduced. And I think that Derek's answer is as close to Derek. Would I be fair to say, like, you'd be as close to being a libertarian as a conservative could be, like just conservative, but with a small government, just not quite in that libertarian camp. But would that not land, the Ontario Party would land, just a little bit more in the conservative camp than libertarian, but certainly freedom fighter and small government.
Well, I certainly believe that the tax burden on individuals needs to be as minimal as possible. I certainly believe that government needs to get out of the way of, people making decisions and things like this. I think that there's active work that the government needs to do in breaking down the regime of kind of indoctrination that we're seeing in, our school system. So there's active building and rebuilding that needs to be done in, our provincial institutions. But yes, I certainly believe in, limited government and, a very low tax burden on Ontarians and Canadians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think historically, big government has always translated into fascism, totalitarianism. And so the idea is to really keep government small as opposed to big. So Derek, just in case our viewers are in Ontario, your website is in the description box. And so if they want to see whether or not there are members in their writing, I know that I was very happy to see Dr. Bernstein in my area. I'm a big fan of his, being, of course, a professor with a conscience about not forcing people to take something that they're not comfortable about. So I definitely know who I'm voting for. Can you maybe elaborate how many members do you have in your party that are running in Ontario? Do you know how many writings there are? Anything along those numbers?
Yeah, so we're going to have fairly close to a full slate of candidates. We're still adding candidates pretty much every day. There will be many more announcements coming over the next couple of weeks. So people should stay tuned at our website, ontarioparty.ca, and they should also make sure to sign up for my emails, because that's the best way to hear what we're up to. They can't be censored. They can't be taken down. It's direct communication. So I would sign up. And we also send out emails specifically just to different ridings, like, when a candidate announces and things. So absolutely sign up for our emails on our website. And we still have room for some additional candidates. So if any of your viewers, would like to be a candidate or would like to volunteer or donate, all of that can be done at our website as well.
Excellent. And Michael, can you maybe tell our viewers again about the Liberty Coalition Canada and what they can get from there and some of the resources that you have there?
Thanks, Tony. We just actually launched a new website. So our website's brand new as of today. And again, just to remind people, we do headline analysis from a Christian worldview. We do legal support for people who are being coerced against their consciences. We work with a lawyer named James Kitchen to do that. And then we have different initiatives where every once in a while we send out requests for people to get involved in a certain area. And that's what we do. So you can go to libertycoalitioncanada.com. And similar to Derek, the best way, one of the things I've learned in the last 2 years is the best way to build a movement is get a good list and have a list of people who are serious about getting involved. And so we're thankful for all of our viewers and listeners and our volunteers. These are important times in the next month or two. So we hope that many of our people will be able to throw their weight and throw their hours behind what Derek is doing over at the Ontario Party. And so we're asking our people to do that.
Okay, that's great. And so maybe Derek, maybe you can just tell us, maybe this will be my last question to you. Can you tell us what Ontario would look like under your leadership? So if you became the Premier of Ontario, what would that look like as opposed to the government of Doug Ford?
Yeah. So people can look at our website for more in-depth policy analysis. But, the gist of it is we want to make sure that we have a government that's running for the people of Ontario. All of our members of parliament will be able to vote their conscience. They won't have to, the main issue right now in politics is party politics. You think that there's, 124 people representing you in Ontario or 338 representing you in Canada. It's a lie. There's about 4 people representing you, and those are the leaders of the major parties with their unelected, advisors. And if anybody steps out of line, they get just booted right out. So we want to bring back true democracy, where individual representatives are actually representing their constituents and are voting according to the way that they see things. So that's one thing we want to do. We, of course, want to bring back freedom and prosperity to this province. So we're not going to be shutting down businesses. We're not going to be, doing the blanket lockdown type of things. We're going to make sure that people can make their own decisions when it comes to medical treatments. And we also want to make sure that we're opening up our school systems, both young and, K-12 and post-secondary, for free debate, free inquiry. We don't want to be indoctrinating people, and we want to reform these systems as well so that they, have the best outcomes. That's just a taste of sort of some of our policies, but there's lots more coming. And if you want to know what we believe on all these issues, sign up for our emails as well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Derek. And everyone, all that information, again, is available in the description box. You could go there, click on the link, and it'll take you to Derek's website, and also the Liberty Coalition Canada with Michael Thiessen. And also, folks, just as an aside, not related to our topic today, in the description box, there's also mention of the online biblical archaeology course I'm teaching, Archaeology of the Bible and Its Neighbors. So it's an online course. It's available beginning Sunday, April 3rd. We hope you take advantage of that as well. I just want to take this opportunity. We've now at the 90-minute mark. I want to thank you, Michael and Derek, for giving up of your busy schedule, your day, to be with me tonight and to discuss these very important issues. Thank you so much.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much. And God bless you guys, and God bless Ontario and the United States.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Thank you again, Michael. Thank you, Derek. And everyone, thank you for joining us. I hope you were edified by what you heard and gained some very valuable information. So thank you. Until next time, God bless. Bye for now.